Okie dokie. Are you ready?
Born ready. Dragonborn ready. Way.
Oh my god, you've got to edit that in at the beginning.
No.
That's a terrible pun.
No.
Hello there, and welcome to another exciting episode of the DM's Book Club, a podcast that I don't need to look the name up every time I say it because I don't have the stage fright a few seconds before. It doesn't matter how many times I say it, I forget because that's me. This is a podcast where Fiona and I sit down and chat about the things we've been reading about to do with D&D. To be fair, it's normally D&D content. Maybe one day we'll branch out. Maybe I'll actually put some effort into doing a decent chapter of a decent size. Fiona puts up with a lot. Let's check in with her. How are you doing?
Hello, live and reporting from London.
I give the UK 8.
8, yes. Nil point. Nil point. I'm doing very well, thank you. I was saying to you a little while ago that I've realized how important I am at work because I checked my work emails whilst on holiday, which I know you're not supposed to do, but I did. And it was very interesting to see that nobody read any of my emails. And
so it's just that statement is fantastic. As one we can all associate with, I just realized how important I am at work. They're moving on and I haven't even left. Just on holiday.
It's just nice to go, no, I am taking the 2-week break. And they're like, okay. And then suddenly, but we've got these things. I'm like, yeah, I'm not here the next 2 weeks. What? I was like, yeah, that's not my fault. You had 6 months to black it.
I know, they forgot all of my holiday all the time. Every single time I have the same conversation, it's just like, you're off. You didn't say you were off. It's like, we booked the holiday 6 months ago. Yeah, but it was 6 months ago, so I've forgotten about it. I put it in your calendar, but I don't look at that. I forget. No matter what I do, it's the wrong thing. And like if I put it in the manager's Canada, if I put it in their calendar.
Well, yeah, they'll never see it in Canada. Yeah,
exactly. But it's the wrong calendar. If I put it in mine, they won't see it. If I put it in both, they're just like, I got confused and it was too far away, so I forgot about it. And you're like, oh,
yeah. We have 3 different calendars. Obviously, our own calendar where we put it in. Then we have our team calendar for it in, and then the team calendar with the other team, so that everyone knows that there's always somebody in the office whenever people. But of course, when it's 2 teams, it just looks like everyone's off at different points. And so you like, how am I going to organize any meetings? It's absolute chaos. It's like, no, it's like, am I that important to book, for people to know? Turns out, yes. But that's not my fault. So.
It's not my fault I'm that important. I am just wonderful at life. And quite frankly, the world needs to accept and roll with that, which is fantastic. So, Fiona, jumping straight into the giddy, fantastical world of D&D, what have you got for us today?
So, Ryan, as we just springboarded off the fact how important am I at work, I hear dragons are quite important for Dungeons and Dragons. They're like one of the pinnacle parts. You need your dungeons, but you may also need your dragons. And we've talked about dragons before on this podcast. We've talked about the metallic dragons and the chromatic dragons and how, obviously in the before times, before, again, my favorite thing at the moment, before Tasha's came out, there was this sort of big good versus evil war between them. And there was this elusive sort of gem dragons, which weren't really involved in 5th edition, but obviously were in previous editions. And now with new Unearthed Arcana, we're trying to look at, sort of revisit Draconic races in general and sort of giving a bit more variety than what is in the player's handbook. So today we're going to look at Unearthed Arcana Draconic Options, different ways and a different alternative to the Dragonborn race that's shown in the player's handbook, as well as a fresh look at the kobold race, which I think will be quite interesting because we did touch on that recently as well.
Is something I am distinctly looking forward to because I have a thing for kobolds because they are brilliant. One thing I thought I'd mention before we get started as well is if you are intrepid followers of the podcast, you will be aware that last episode, I think, it depends on this is testing to see whether or not you put them out in order, either last episode or in a future episode, we talk about Feywild options. And just like Draconic options, a lot of the things that this Unearthed Arcana is going through, there are some unwritten rules that sort of apply throughout to do with, and you've mentioned it, ability score increases and languages. Tasha brought out a new set of rules that effectively opens the door to whatever creative choices you want to make to stop you from getting pigeonholed in the stereotypes of a particular race or species. and to be able to be more flexible with the character creation. So I didn't think I mentioned it enough at the beginning of when I did my section. So just to remind, ability score increases, you can do what you want with now. It's either a +2 or a +1 in whatever you want, or 3 +1s, I believe is the other option. And languages, effectively, you get to agree with your DM what languages you speak based on a decent assortment and what would be appropriate for your character. Brilliant. Right.
Disclaimer done. Disclaimer done. No, and I think
Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Well, before we dive in, there's actually an extra bit in it. As you will see, right, it is actually 7 pages, not 4 pages. I know. I wonder if they had some feedback about this in the Unearthed Arcana, saying it's nice to get new races options or new ancestry options, but we want more. We want to test out more, or they wanted to try out more. So actually, at the end of this, you've got an assortment of spells and a handful of feats which have a connection to draconic power. And they're quite interesting, I think. It's so we'll have a quick look at those as well, but primarily we're going to look at the draconic options, so the alternative races that you could play.
Speaking of the draconic options, I think probably the best place to start is giving us a little bit of a vague general advice about what sort of dragons we've got. So what have we got on our plate?
So as I sort of referred to before, we have sort of 3 types of, I don't want to say main dragons, that's not what I mean, but 3 distinct lineages of dragon. We've obviously, like I said, we've got the chromatic ones, which are the ones that are in the past seen as the baddies. So they're the ones with the sort of the black, green, blue, red, white. They have raw elemental fury, which I think is a great just way of describing things in general. If you are described in your meeting as raw elemental fury, don't mess with me, I guess. So that's on one side, and I guess the most famous example of that is Tiamat, the 5-headed mother of dragons. You've seen the mini everywhere. It's on many books. She's pretty badass, essentially, and currently resides in one of the layers of hell, I seem to remember.
Avernus, I believe.
Avernus, that is right. On the opposite side, you have the metallic dragons. Again, these are the dragons which we are most commonly associated with good, but again, not necessarily so anymore. But they've got the unflinching tenacity of metallic. So brass, bronze, copper, gold, silver, all colours which all look very similar to me compared to...
I have to say, there's one thing that I always read about when this sort of comes up, because metallic dragons are always described as being like strong and tenacious because metal is. And I can just tell you now that copper, gold, and silver are not very tenacious metals. They are malleable, they are soft. There is a reason why nothing hard is made from them.
Brass as well. That's what I'm thinking, God, how much brass do we have?
I know, at least that's an alloy at the very least. And bronze, I get, they did actually make things out of that. But we're not talking steel or titanium here. We're talking, gold is a superconductor. They use it in phones. They do not use it in armor. There's a reason.
I love the idea of having a titanium dragon option, though. That'll be like high up on the scale. But of course, finally, as I said, referred to, there is a third option. There's the gem dragons. So they claim to be heirs of the ruby dragon, whose name I will get wrong, but I think it's Sardior. I think it's like Dior. Sadio?
Yeah. Dior. Yeah, I like that.
I'm sorry. Sadio is the firstborn of all creation, made by Bahamut, who is the one of the metallic dragons, the head of the metallic dragons. I think he's a giant white dragon, I seem to remember.
He's the platinum dragon, I think.
The platinum dragon. Yeah, see, I got my history wrong. I say the great platinum dragon and the Tiamat, who is obviously the 5-headed mother of dragons in the first days of the first world. And it talks about their colours being, amethyst, crystal, emerald, sapphire, and topaz. And it's with all this sort of the different sort of variations of it, you just having those colours. And you can imagine if there was a huge big fight between these dragons in the sky, just seeing this whole shift of colours smashing and clashing together, the way the hues are glinting off their scales. It's just, I think just being able to describe any kind of dragon or dragonborn, as we'll go into, with having these beautiful colors is quite flavorful. And I think just being aware of it when you're describing it. Although I like the idea of being a topaz dragonborn. I'm topaz.
Yep. Now, gem dragons are an interesting one because I think they've been around in D&D lore for some time, but I'd never heard of them before personally until we'd spoken about them, I believe, on one of the previous episodes of last season. God, this must be a long time ago now. And they keep sort of coming up. Yeah, imagine if the good guy and the bad guy have a kid and it's conflicted and wants to be neither of them. It's this neutral dragon, isn't it? But I just love the idea of gem dragons. They're just, Dior, I think, would be the perfect god of a gem dragon. They're just fabulous and sparkly and smell delightful.
Yes, yeah. But you're right, that originally their alignment was neutral because you'd already had the good and the bad, and then together they'd had the neutral. And I have a sneaking suspicion by the end of this year, we'll have stats for 5 edition stats, for gem dragons. I think they're going to make a comeback because it feels like it's about time. They recently released, I think it was last year, it was the 45th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. They released stats for Sapphire dragons because obviously Sapphire is 45 years. So I think going forward, they're definitely going to have more and more gem dragon stats.
I totally agree with you. And dragons are something that actually a lot of third-party publishers often put a lot of material out for as well. I have a lot of Kobold Press material, which they have a lot of things called the Tome of Beasts and Tome of Beasts 2, and interestingly, Tome of Beasts 3, which is just sequences of the same. Yeah, exactly. But there are always versions of dragons in that. People love playing around with dragons, and gem dragons haven't quite made an appearance yet, but they will. You can just guarantee they will.
So Dragonborns, as we know them, are sort of humanoid dragons, no tails or anything like that. They just look, imagine an upstanding crocodile. That's how I imagine it, because our player Sam drew a crocodile standing up for his character. I've always seen it like that, and I've never seen it otherwise. But yes, so obviously we've got the 3 different types. We've got chromatic, metallic, and gem. Let's look at chromatic first. So again, it describes it as raw elemental power, fury of the volcano, the biting of arctic winds, the raging of lightning storms. But they've also got the subtle whisper of the swamp and forest, corrosive and toxic. Which
I love the idea of a dragon being subtle. Like green dragons are not subtle creatures. It's amazing. But they're elemental and force chromatic dragons, aren't they? That's the biggest thing. There's no civilization about them. They are emotional, wild, passionate, and angry creatures that rely on instinct and natural destructive energy. That's one in my head. It's always the biggest difference between that and metallic dragons, which are much more civilized, I would guess, like refined and purposeful. Where metallics are, like specifically for a purpose, chromatics are just wild and uncontrolled. But so we've got the 5 different evil. I use inverted commas dragons. Tell us about what sort of dragonborn get born from them.
So again, it's got at the top, you've got the different kinds creature types, and we did talk about this again last time, that there are, we've got different types for different creatures. This is a humanoid. It's not a draconic or a dragon or a monstrosity. Interestingly enough, though, on a previous podcast, so sort of jumping back a bit, we had John Dodd from UK Games Expo talking about the horror lineages. And in those ones, you could actually have 2 types on it. You could be an undead and a humanoid, or you could be a construct and a humanoid. And with both the Fey folk one and this one, it's always humanoid or something else. So obviously Fey folk was, one of them was a Fey. And what's interesting about that, in the first page, it talks about creature type, how that's the rules. They don't have rules themselves, but there are different ways that certain spells will affect on them. So for example, cure wounds won't work on a creature that's a construct, for example, or maybe undead, but it will work on a humanoid. So if you have a creature, if you've got a character that is both a humanoid and undead, cure wounds will technically still work. And so I thought that was quite interesting. It doesn't really affect this particular Unearthed Arcana, but I thought it's good to mention that in future, because where you might have several types, it does affect certain things. But then again, does that mean Divine Smite works on the undead if you're also a humanoid? I think you have to play it by ear on that one.
Probably would. Just
some food for thought on that one.
Humanoids, mediums, 30 feet of walking speed seems pretty standard so far.
And then you have the chromatic ancestry, which you don't have to roll on. You can just pick. I think we talked about this a little bit last time, where there are suggestions or there's tables to give you an idea, and you roll a d8 and you see what you get. They've taken that out now. And I think maybe it's because through feedback or something like that, they've gone, actually, you could just pick, rather than rolling and go, oh, I don't want that option. So you've got, like I said, the 5 types. You've got black, which is acid damage, blue, which is lightning damage, green, which is poison damage, red, which is fire damage, obviously, and white, which is cold damage. So all the elements are covered. And as I said, I always get black and green mixed up, so that's acid and poison. I just assume they're the same thing, but they're not. So make sure you're aware of which one you're choosing for that one.
Absolutely. Acid and poison are very different, very, very different. Poison is an element type that in D&D has a lot of things that is resistant to it or immune to it. I mean, if you're going into a campaign where you're fighting the undead, think again. Think again.
Again.
But then equally, I mean, as we'll go through, it's not just the offensive capability, it's also the defensive capability. So there are useful things for both. So we used to Dragonborn from the player's handbook. So some things that these Unearthed Arcana Dragonborn have are similar, right? So there's a breath weapon is the first thing.
Yes, so all of these creatures, I think even the kobold to an extent have a breath weapon of some sort. So essentially you take the attack action and you can replace one of your attacks with an exhalation of magical energy, which I always think is quite amusing. So for the Chromatic Dragon, it is a 30-foot line that is 5 feet wide. And then any creatures in that line have to make a saving throw, and they take 2d8 damage of the type that's associated with your ancestry. And then that increases all the way up to 5d8 when you get to level 17. So you can pick quite a punch, and you can use it a number of times per your proficiency, and then you regain them all year long. So you can't use it all the time, but it's still pretty good. But what you're sort of referring to is something called Draconic resistance, so that you already have a resistance to the damage type that you are associated with. So obviously if you are a blue dragon that spouts out lightning, you will have an automatic resistance to lightning damage, which makes sense. And then particularly for the Chromatic dragons, you have something called Chromatic warding. At the start of level 3, you have an action that channels your draconic energies or magics, I would say, to protect yourself. And so for 10 minutes, you become immune to that damage type that's associated with yourself. And you can only do it once per long rest, which can be, I think 10 minutes it's a long time in D&D. So it's a one all or nothing. So
that's a big situational thing. You can jump this into a volcano if you're a red dragonborn. You could jump into the frozen sea if you were a white dragonborn. So some really useful applications there. And I think this is the first time in a little while I've actually seen something that gives immunity to damage. Normally it's just resistance, but that is definitely a step up. The breath weapon as well. A couple of things I noticed, but seem to be different to the player's handbook one. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the player's handbook breath weapon, I think, was once per long rest, was it? Or
yes.
So having a number of times equal to proficiency bonus is definitely a step up. But that's not even the best bit. It's right at the beginning. Do you see? When you take the attack action, you can replace one of your attacks with an exhalation of magical energy. So if you've got multi-attack, you can breath weapon and still then attack regularly.
Yes,
so it's not a one or the other thing. This is just a single weapon attack replacement, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, because again, it is sort of because it goes up quite a lot. I mean, 2d8 damage when you're at level 1 to 3 is quite significant anyway. So if you're attacking only once, it's usually like a d8 or a d12 or something. So that is quite a Hail Mary, and being able to do it several times is quite good. And then all the way up to 5d8, it can hit quite a powerful punch. So yeah, it's a pretty good one. Again, what we'll see when we go on to the other Dragonborns, it is slightly different. I didn't realize that all the breath weapons were different, and I don't know if it's the same. The actual dragons, the different dragons types as well. I think they are the same in the sense of so obviously here you got a 30-foot line that is 5 feet wide, so that can hit quite far away in a particular room, but they all have to be hopefully standing all one behind each other. So
sorry, sir, do you mind just shifting to your left slightly, just all in the line? Thank you.
Yeah, but just angle it up. Exactly that. So,
absolutely. Yeah, there are some. I mean, I quite like, as I say, any class that can breathe an elemental flame or fire or ice or lightning is a cool thing for me. I do appreciate that. And very different situations and different things that may, require you to do that. It's going to be less useful if you're a wizard, because throwing a fireball is always going to be better. But if you are a melee class, for instance, it is just another thing that you can add to your arsenal. So very useful. Interestingly enough, and this is what I was thinking, when you make an attack action with a weapon, you can make a bonus attack to attack with an offhand weapon, right? But you can't just make an offhand weapon attack unless you've made a regular attack. It's sort of part of the same sort of cycle, effectively. So if you've got 2 daggers, you attack one with the action and you bonus action with the other. In theory, if you're a 2-weapon fighter, then you can attack, replace with the breath weapon, and then still do your off-arm attack with the second attack. And I think as I read it, according to the rules, that would be totally fine. So I'm thinking if you were, say, a rogue, for instance, with a dagger in your offhand, you could breathe fire and then attack and still get sneak attack damage if you then did that. So there are some unique sort of, I don't know, like the sort of thoughts and things that sort of help with this, I think.
as you said, like the sort of the sneaky dragon, the idea that there's a Dragonborn is like, hello, stab, done.
I have the subtlety of a swamp. Those are chromatic. Those are your bad people. What about your goods, so your metallics? How do they differ to chromatics?
So as I sort of said before, so these are the unflinching tenacity of the metallic dragons. So you've got the fire of the hearth and forge, the cold of the high mountain air, the spark of inspiration, the scoring touch of acid that cleanses and purifies. So again, I think we've talked about this before.
I'm covered in acid, and a dragon helpfully goes, soon your skeleton will be pure of flesh. Yay.
You have been cleansed. Congrats. It's been so hard trying to get rid of obviously the evil and good things out of it. But you can tell with the writing of this, like compared to before where it's like corrosive and toxic, this is like cleansing and pure, like a face peel. Like it's very they've clearly written it in different ways, which I think is hilarious, that they're really trying to get rid of, like, it's signposting, but at the same time it's like, well, they could be good or they could be evil. So I thought that was good. But yes, same sort of things to begin with. You've got creature type humanoid, medium size, walking speed of 30, and then metallic ancestry. You've got brass, which is fire, bronze, that's lightning, copper, which is acid, gold, which is fire. Oh, you've got 2 fires. I forgot about that. And then silver, which is cold. So you don't have poison. I guess poison is considered too evil, perhaps. Yeah.
Exactly. Too evil. So breath weapon is very similar, right? Except from, instead of being a 30-foot line, we've got a 15-foot cone. So different shape, different use there.
Yeah, which I assume that it will all be the same, but apparently not. So yeah, I guess it is interesting that that's the case. And you get, but same sort of damage, you get 2d8 damage with that associated type, which goes all the way up to 5d8 when you get to the level 17. And of course you get draconic resistance, which is, resistance to your damage type associated with your ancestry. But the cool thing about metallic dragons is that you don't get one breath weapon. Oh no, you get 2, because if you look, I guess if you remember from our own episode last season, they have stuff like sleep, they have stuff like I think it was paralyzing breath as well. And so you get a similar thing. So at 3rd level you gain a 2nd breath weapon. When you take the attack action, you can replace one of your attacks with an exhalation of magical gas in a 15-foot cone. So slightly different. And then the saves EC is a constitution saving throw, and you can choose one of the following options. You can either have each creature in the area to succeed on a strength saving throw or be pushed 20 feet away from you and be knocked prone, which is always pretty good, or they must succeed on a constitution saving throw and become incapacitated to the start of your next turn.
There are some fantastic options there. Being able to hit multiple creatures and incapacitate some of them is a encounter swinging change for you, especially if you're being swarmed or if there's some big bads and they get very bad constitution saving throws. Strength and constitution saving throws generally for baddies tend to be quite strong. So don't be surprised if these things don't always work. But I mean, that's a really cool option. And it's in addition to your regular breath weapon, isn't it? You get to use this once per long rest. So
yes. So but again, like you could technically, if you had multi-attack, use one breath weapon on one thing and then the 2nd breath weapon on the other. So you could just take 2 big inhalations and then go,
I'm thinking the swashbuckling sort of rogue aspect, or even just a regular rogue, actually just knock someone over prone to give you advantage, or incapacitate them to give you advantage, and then sneak attack advantage with your offhand, even if there's no ally within range. It's a decent combo, actually.
Yeah, I guess compared to the chromatic ones, which obviously have a bit of a bigger reach, but obviously a smaller area of effect, you've got the, like I said, 15-foot cone, which will spread out from you. So, and both breath weapons, try saying that, 15-foot cone. So they will cover the same areas, will be the same people you attack, essentially.
Exactly. But that metallic breath weapon is in replacement to the chromatic immunity, isn't it? So there's no immunity for elemental damage with these types. It's more, you have some control use, but you don't have defensive use. So.
Exactly.
Let's visit the new type of dragons, these gem dragons. What sort of excitement have we got when we have a look at these guys?
they talked about the colors and mysterious powers of gem dragons, which again is like, ooh, mysterious? In what way? You know in what way. It's all about the mind. It's the force of will. It's the brilliant light of insight. It's the resounding echo of discovery. And it's a word I can't pronounce, of despair.
Desiccation. Great word. Desiccation.
Great word.
I mean, you don't use that word enough, I think. Everyone should bring that in.
Next meeting, bring it in. So this meeting gives me a desiccation of despair.
That would be far too true with most work, to be fair.
It is so true. But yet, same sort of thing to begin with. They are humanoid, they're a medium, walking speed of 30, and then gem ancestry. So here you've got amethyst, which is a damage type of force. You've got crystal, which is radiant, which in my head makes sense. Emerald, which is psychic. Sapphire, which is thunder, and topaz, which is necrotic. To be interesting damage types, these are not your typical elementals. These are the weirder ones that tend to be in different things. Actually, apart from thunder is normally, you can put that into the sort of regular things, but radiant, necrotic, or psychic damage is an interesting one. Very few things give you psychic damage, actually, so that's cool. So again, maybe if you were making a campaign, if you were going to go for higher levels already, maybe considering a gem Dragonborn would be actually quite interesting, because then I guess, because as we've talked about it before, when you go higher up, quite a lot of things do have resistances to most different types or common types of damage types. Wow, I've said types way too long, and now it's not become a word. But yeah, like you said, like force damage, radiant damage, psychic damage, necrotic, these are all high level, high damaging stuff, which many players will not have defenses against, and presumably not many big bads will have resistances to either. So yeah, interesting, I think, from that point. Moving on, though, you've got the breath weapon. Again, so the same sort of thing, but again, like the metallic dragons, it is in a 15-foot cone. And it goes up all the way to 5d8, 5d8, our favorite thing. And you have draconic resistances to that type associated with your gem ancestry. So you would be, if you were a topaz dragon, resistant to necrotic, which again, it could be quite useful in higher level fights. So, yeah,
especially in a Curse of Strahd campaign, that's not a bad idea, is it? Necrotic damage resistance.
I don't know what you're talking about. changes all damage type to fire, just in case.
Yep. No, it's really, really cool. And they've got the draconic resistance as well. So far, so good.
Yes.
What else has a gem Dragonborn got?
I am so glad you asked me, Ryan. So they've got two extra things. One is psionic mind, so you can speak telepathically to any creature you can see within 30 feet of you. The creature must be able to understand one language, but it doesn't give them the ability to respond to you telepathically. As we've talked about before, telepathy works great, but only if everyone's on the link, everyone's in the party chat. If it's just you giving out orders, it can be really disconcerting.
Yeah, exactly. It's a one-way communication as well. So you can talk and anyone can understand you, but they can't talk back. So, I mean, it's pretty useful. If there are animals or there are, I mean, actually, to be fair, it says it's got to understand at least one language. So, but if there's anything that is necessarily violent and is misunderstanding you, you can quickly go, hang on, stop, we're friends, what are you doing? And they sort of look at you and maybe it sort of stops.
Yeah.
Telepathy is a very, very useful thing. It can be, especially in silent stealth missions, if you're captured, if you're trying to interrogate someone, all these things are very useful.
It's only with one person, though. It says any creature within the 30 feet. So I guess if you're doing it in Browns, it can only be one person rather than a group of people. It's always, again, like you said, it's always useful. It's only within 30 feet, though, and you can see it. So it's not as far as message or sending, perhaps, which might be a bit more useful. But they are obviously spells. So it's good. It's good to know, I guess.
But Fiona, I want my character to fly. Can my character fly?
If you're a gem Dragonborn, yes, you can fly. There is something called, and I hate it so much, Ryan, called gem flights. So
amazing.
Starting at level 3, your bonus action to temporarily summon an array of spectral gems that match your gem ancestry in the shape of wings.
Little wings, yay!
That lasts for 1 minute. And you gain a fly speed equal to your walking speed, and you can hover, and you can only use it once per long rest. But it looks cool. I'm not gonna lie. The idea that you just sort of like power up and need these amazing sort of gems. You look fabulous. You are Dior, right? You are Chanel. Yeah. But It's always been my thing is that I'm not a big fan of people who are able to fly at level 1. I say that as someone who has a magical item that makes them fly quite often.
You got that very early on. And to be fair, this one is a level 3 thing. So at least you've got a couple of little jinx. And it's once per day as well. So unlike characters that can always fly, this is a use it for a minute. So there's either you're going to have a very limited circumstantial thing to be able to get around, or it's going to be in battle and you get to use it for one thing. And don't forget as well, this is something for DMs to remember, but if people insist on flying everywhere and they get knocked unconscious, remember that then they fall and normally hit the ground and normally take a death saving throw, fail immediately when doing that. So there are risks to flying. It makes you, as soon as you start rolling a death save and you already have one fail, it makes the whole thing horrendous because suddenly you're like, if I roll a 1, that's it. That's gone. So it is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Thinking back to what we said in the last episode about Fae folk, obviously the owl folk have that reaction to make a DC check so that if they're falling, they can right themselves. So you don't get it with gem dragons, maybe because they look too cool, like falling in style. That's what I like in my head, that they're just like crashing into the ground. But yes, so those are the 3 different types of Dragonborn that I've given out in this Draconic Options. But of course, we have saved the best to last. We're going to look at kobolds. So
kobolds.
Yes.
Kobolds. Yes. Oh my goodness. I love kobolds. So I think it is Volos that kobolds have got a whole section in about their communities and how they work. So there's already published material. I don't think we've done an episode on kobolds, and we really should because it's just wonderful. But they were in Volo's Guide as player characters, monstrous players characters before, but this is a new tweak on them, isn't it?
Yes. So in the one from before, in the Volo's Guide, they did have negative stats, and there was a lot of outcry about this having like certain things like the aggressiveness of orcs and stuff like that, but also having negative inherent traits when your kobold isn't maybe not like these things. So I think this is trying to make some pathway to sort of change it in the other direction. But yes, kobolds, in case they've completely passed you by, they are the smallest of draconic creatures. And Volo's Guide sums it up quite nicely about what kind of creatures they are like. But here it talks about them being like serving chromatic or metallic dragons, that they worship them as divine beings, but they know how dangerous they are and they can help to defend against others. So they're not like willful, blind, obedient servants. They have their own mind and intelligence about things. They just choose to do these things, which I think is quite key to do it. So regardless of what their relationship is, they are going to help, or they will break away from it. It's not necessarily, it's like one way of portraying kobolds, but you can do it however you want.
Actually, you know what? Some really cool things here. So kobolds are, little cretinous, lizardy things that chase around after dragons and are generally supposed to be evil, but again, not so much these days. What do you get if you're a kobold then?
So creature type humanoid, shock horror there. Size small, which does make sense. They are smallish creatures. I imagine them to be like upright dogs, which maybe it's just because they're super cute. I think that's what I like.
Exactly. Kobolds are the sort of creatures that stab your knees. That's the sort of height you're dealing with there.
Quick, get his shins. You have dark vision. It's the only draconic race in this book that has dark vision. And I always forget this. I always forget that Dragonborns do not have dark vision. So that's something to know. So that's within 60 feet. Then you have Draconic Legacy. So the kobold connection to dragons can manifest itself in unpredictable ways, which it's always a really cool little like, oh, okay, so what do you have? So you can choose one of the following. You can have advantages on saving throws to avoid or end the frightened condition on yourself, which is definitely a big change from Volo's, because I remember there was that whole sort of section about the grovel, snibble, weep one, where you go and you pretend to be frightened, but actually you're giving advantage to your compatriots and stuff. So I thought that was interesting, that you're not necessarily going to be a frightened person anymore. You are going to be a brave little adventurer. The other ones you can know a cantrip of your choice from the sorcerer's spell list. And again, we've talked about this before. You can use any of the sort of mental modifiers, so intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. And then the final one is that you can make unarmed strikes with your tail. If you hit it, it deals 1d6 plus your strength, bludgeoning damage, and you use that instead of a normal unarmed strike. So it's a bit like...
That is more than a monk attack, by the way.
Yes, exactly, more than a monk. Again, it's what do you choose from that? I sort of advantages of saving throws will be quite useful later on for sure, but I think there's something nice about being able to hit something with your tail, or have an extra attack that's an unarmed strike in some way. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of stuff that can fit into other classes and make some quite nice sort of linking effects that combine, say, sorcerers or warriors or clerics, whatever you want to be. Especially the idea of being able to get a cantrip. That's more useful than you think with a lot of different classes, although it is on the sorcerer spell list. So a little bit more limited than you might always think. But
yes,
so kobolds, yes, they used to have the negative strength in Volos, but they had an amazing ability called pack tactics, where they got advantage on all attacks as long as they were stood next to an ally. They got rid of that on this one, and instead we have something called Draconic Roar, don't we?
Yes, we do. So again, I guess mixture of that pack tactics thing you're just talking about, but also giving them a breath weapon of some sort, but obviously with not any damage because they're not, I want to say they're not really dragons, they are descended from dragons. But yeah, for a bonus action, you let out a Draconic Roar at your enemies within 10 feet of you. And until the end of your next turn, you and your allies have advantage on attack rolls against these creatures who could hear the roar. And you can use this a number of times for your proficiency bonus and regain them all on a long rest. So it's pretty good. You could do it over and over and over again, and always, if you spend it out in one big fight, you could always have advantages on attack rolls with the enemies in front of you, within 10 feet. So you have to be up quite close to them, but I think it's great, like being able to give that advantage to yourself and all of your allies, I guess. So that's pretty good.
It takes the advantage for them and applies it to everybody. And you can use this multiple times as well. Advantage is a very, very useful thing. Very useful thing for getting those crits, for combining with champion fighters or hexblade warlocks or other things that give you expanded crit ranges. There's huge applications here for other classes and feats. So really useful. Very, very useful indeed.
We'll then go on very, very quickly, because I know we're almost out of time, for feats and spells. And so essentially what they've done, they've created a feat, one for each dragon type. So you've got the gift of the chromatic dragon, the gift of the metallic dragon, and you've got the gift of the gem dragon. And each of them, they have some sort of bonus to something. So for example, the chromatic dragon, you can touch a weapon and infuse it with some sort of damage type for an extra 1d4, always very useful. If you take any kind of elemental damage, you can use your reaction to give yourself resistance to it. So you can use that as well. So that's pretty good as an early sort of, I guess, ability. If you're that sort of person that takes feats instead of ability score, I think that's quite useful for the chromatic one. In terms of the metallic one, you learn Cure Wounds, always useful. Cure Wounds is always good. You can manifest Protective Wings. That's the second one of that. But with this one, you actually use it as a shield effect, essentially, and you can shield yourself or another creature within 5 feet of you to get, if they're hit by an attack roll, and you grant a d4 bonus to that AC, which again could be useful. It's that extra little bit of bless, extra little bit of the spark there, which is really good. And then finally, you have the Gem Dragon, where you increase a mental ability score by at least 1. And then if you take damage from a creature in front of you, you can do a reaction to emanate telekinetic energy, which I'm always like, oh, what does that mean? But yeah, get a bit more. It's basically you can deal 2d8 force damage, so that extra little bit, and you can use that reaction again the number of times to your proficiency and gain them all on long rest. So they're all slightly different. I get it doesn't necessarily say that you have to be from a draconic lineage or have to be tied to that. So you could I guess get several of these if you're always going for feats and stuff like that.
You could. The one thing it does mention is it may actually just be a gift from a dragon, like some dragon that you have either killed and slain and bathed in its blood, or something that you served and has blessed you effectively. This is exactly the sort of thing that a dragon may bestow on somebody. So yeah, you've got a campaign where a dragon features. Maybe do some work for them. You never know. You might get a feat out of it.
They're all pretty good, and yeah. There's no stipulations that if you take one, the other two are limited to you. And then finally, of course, we have to look at some spells, because dragons are magical, essentially. So
indeed they are. Some good spells in here as well. We've got a huge range, so lots of 2nd level spells, but goes right up to 7th. I mean, we'll see which ones are more effective than others, but I mean, were there any spells here that stood out to you as being interesting?
Well, instantly, the one that stood out to me was Draconic Transformation, where essentially you draw on the magic of dragons to transform yourself, and you take on different things of being a dragon. So you take stuff from the dragon's a dragon stat book. Essentially, you get blind sight with a range of 30 feet. That's pretty incredible. Again, it's a 7th level transmutation spell, so obviously it's going to take a lot of power. But blind sight, I think, is incredibly useful if you're in combat and there's magical darkness, or there's lots of people hiding in the walls. being able to be able to see that or be able to sense that is pretty good. You also get, wings. You get a fly speed of 40. Of course you do.
Of course you do. 7th level. You've got to forgive that one.
I do forgive that one because it makes sense. But it's 40 feet, so that's a little bit quicker than you would be normally. And then finally, you get to exhale a breath of shimmering energy in a 30-foot cone as a bonus action, especially when you cast it and as a bonus action. And that's 3d8 force damage if people fail the dexterity saving throw. So you get quite a lot in that, I think. You'd be able to fly around, be able to use a breath weapon. Yeah,
you do. You get a lot. Equally, though, I also think for a 7th level spell, do you get enough? Like 3d8 force damage at 13th level, which would be the slowest or the smallest level that you would need to be to cast this. I just feel like it's a little underwhelming. I mean, admittedly, you get to do that as a bonus action every turn, so you can still do the other stuff you're doing, and that probably gives it a bit more respect than perhaps I'm giving it. But yeah, there's another spell I'm thinking of, another transformation spell. I think either was in Tasha's or it was in Xanathar's. I can't remember, but it was a sort of spell that basically gets wizards to be able to double attack and do force damage, and transmutation spell. I don't know which one's better, actually. I think the other one may be better, but interesting one, definitely.
Yeah. And that can only be, actually thinking about it, there's a really nice little summary table at the bottom of this page which tells you like which classes it can be taken up by. So it's druid, sorcerer, and wizard for that particular spell.
One that jumped out at me was Flame Stride, which is quite a fun one. So again, a bonus action spell, concentration 1 minute, but it gives you the billowing flames of a dragon to cover your feet, granting you explosive speed. For the duration, your speed increases by 20 feet and moving doesn't provoke opportunity attacks. But the interesting thing is, if you move within 5 feet of a creature or an object that isn't being worn or carried, it takes 1d6 fire damage from your trail of heat, but it can only take it once per turn. But you take no opportunity attacks and you're moving really quickly. So you basically, just like the Flash, you just drift around and walk past everybody, burning them with no save, by the way. And to make it even more fun, you can cast a spell at higher levels, which does more and more damage. So it's just this ridiculous spell where you run in, hit someone, and then run off and they're burning. And then you do it every turn and no one can catch you. And the idea of that, I find it hilariously fun.
Yeah, I definitely got big Sonic the Hedgehog vibes where you're like just running around people. So yeah, that would be a really cool one. The other thing to note in general, obviously, feel free to go into these spells in your own time, listeners. But all the other spells, so interesting enough, we picked 2 out of the 3 spells that don't have a name. So they are named after famous or infamous dragons, which I had to quickly look up before this session. So they're all famous dragons, are Icing Death, what's the other? Nathair, sorry, and then Nathair, and then Ral O Him. I don't know. They're all famous dragons, which I've not heard of, but I assume they're in like the Dragonlance series or like famous in previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons. So it's nice, I guess, to have that little bit of a reference to that. Whilst we're doing a changing and developing going forward, it's always nice to refer back to like, oh, remember this dragon? Their spell is now here, or something about them is here.
Exactly. And very quickly on these spells, some of them have very, very effective abilities. So Icing Death has the ability to, 2nd level spell, to freeze somebody in place, which is very useful. Nathair's Mischief is an amazingly fun spell. Again, only 2nd level, but it creates a cube that has a mysterious and mischievous ability to it that can either charm, blind, incapacitate, or create difficult terrain. And it changes every turn, and it lasts a minute, and you can move the cube around without using an action or a bonus action. So that spell is actually ridiculously good at controlling the battlefield. It's a very, very good one. But the one I wanted to bring up, because this is the one that created the most discussion online, is the Rowlathim's Psychic Lance.
Yes.
Because there is... sometimes spells are written in Unearthed Arcana and they do not have the correct balancing things in them. And because of that, people go, hang on, doesn't that mean? And then everyone thinks about it and you go, yes, that's exactly what it means. So I don't know if you saw this one, but it's an action. You unleash a shimmering lance of psychic power from your forehead at a creature that you can see within range. Alternatively, this is the fun bit, you can utter the creature's name. If the named target is within range, it gains no benefit from cover or invisibility as the lance homes in on it.
Very cool.
If the named target isn't within range, the lance dissipates and the spell slot is not expended.
Ah.
So What you can do is go, my big bad in this campaign is called Fiona. I cast the spell and say Fiona. Nothing happens. Next round, I move a little bit further. I cast a spell and say Fiona. Nothing happens. Go forward a little bit. And you just spend the entire day
just shouting names like Marco Polo, like
Marco. Oh, there you are. Bang. And suddenly it's 10d6 psychic damage. It is a ridiculous spell. And I can see what they're trying to do. But there should be never the ability to cast a spell without ritual casting it, where you don't choose the spell slot, because absolutely. It's just
otherwise you're going to be that seems silly that you can't, that the spell slot is not expended every time you use it, because every time you've sort of ready it, because that's the big rule we've always had, is like, if you hold your spell or something and it doesn't go off, you've technically lost concentration on that spell. You've used that energy up. So absolutely, that seems incredibly broken.
Absolutely it does. It really does. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up, because if you look at the Reddit chats about that spell, it is really funny. I mean, there's some fantastic dragon options. We've got feats, we've got spells, we've got races. I mean, of everything here, is there a combination that you would want to play if you were playing in a campaign, or do you kind of think that this is all a little bit pointless? Because some Unearthed Arcana can miss the mark, and some of it can be brilliant.
You know me, Ryan. I'm a simple girl who likes playing a human. And I did talk to someone the other day. It's like, why would you play a human? You could be all these things. I think there's way too much choice. And this is just me speaking of it. Obviously, if you find a character or a race or an ancestry or else that speaks to you, that's brilliant. And I think, and it's so good that we're having these options. But for me, I've never found anything about Dragonborn in general. I don't want to say not interesting. I do think they're interesting, but I feel like there's just so much to them. There's so many cool things to them. But I'm like, maybe it's just overwhelming for a choice. Like, certainly if you were a gem Dragonborn, having Psionic Mind or Gemflight gets to a point when you have these things, like, obviously you'd always use Gemflight when you could. Absolutely, you definitely use that. But Psionic Mind, maybe I'd forget about it. I'm one of those people that always has 3 things and I forget about the third thing all the time unless someone shouts at me to remember it. I like simple builds. And I think with all these going forward, having extra things that are positive, which is great, but it just for me means more things to remember. So I think out of all of them, I'd actually play the kobold, because it's super cute, it's super fun. And like the Draconic Roar is quite useful and it helps other people. I think quite a lot of the other things help yourself. And I guess maybe for me as a player, I like helping other people. Or like, I think I get to a point where I'm like, right, what else can I do that's not necessary? Well, I say that all I ever do is rage attack. But that's what I know I do best at. But if I can think of something that's in the environment, or if there's something I go, oh, I'll do this instead, that it changes away from it. Whereas I think for the other Dragon Balls, it will just be breath weapon, which is fine. It's fine. But I think for me, kobolds for sure.
They are brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. And I can't get enough of kobolds. They're wonderful additions to any campaign. And if you have 5 minutes of your time, Google splat critical role. No more needs to be said. That is a kobold in a campaign, and it's just wonderful. But anyway, thank you for that whistle top tour. We learned a lot about dragons, and I'm going to chuck loads more dragons at you guys. What have you been up to otherwise? Where can we find you in the horrible place that is the real world?
Well, when I've not been suddenly realizing my own death is happening through lots more dragons coming towards me, you can find me on What Am I Rolling, which is a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it's going very well.
Very well. That's what I've heard from primary sources. Primary
sources, straight from the source. What else? I was on a show recently called Dragon's Duel, which is a D&D game show where I made a character based on trivia questions. And let me tell you, Ryan, my maths is appalling. So we did all right. It's interesting, I guess, because for me, we created an average character, but for people who were very good at it, created ridiculous characters. And we did a one-shot of White Plume Mountain, where it's interesting to watch it back, because a lot of people go in and fight the fight, and I played like a mountain dwarf who is a bard, because that's what we rolled. And I did a great one. I did Hypnotic Pattern. Obviously, everyone has lots of good strength, but not much in terms of wisdom, so they all failed. But it turns out the creature could not be charmed that they were fighting. I enjoyed myself.
There's always a thing about charming, isn't there?
But yeah, have a look at that. That's the Dragon's Duel podcast. That one shot will be out soon. I think it's on Twitch currently. But yeah, my character was Helga Smash Dagger. So if you look for those episodes, they'll be out now.
Smash Dagger is not something I like to think about. Good God.
What about you, Ryan? What are you up to, my friend?
Oh, I'm going to spend the next half an hour thinking about the implications of smashing a dagger. Ugh. Stabbing I've heard of, but oh dear. I have been lurking on YouTube. You can find me on Ursa Ryan. I play lots of games and you can watch me there. But I've also got a Discord called the Ursa Ryan Discord. Come and say hi, because I will chat to you about anything such as D&D and the podcast. And Fee, lurks there occasionally. You can come find her and draw her out of her little lurking position where she overviews and judges everything.
Somebody say Pathfinder.
I'm here. Isn't it terrible?
Oh no. Yeah.
We've got some cool stuff coming along. Actually, our campaign, we don't film it anymore, but we playing a personal campaign that I'll tell you all about. That is now got to 15th level, which is very intriguing to DM, and is starting to sort of get to interesting places, I think. And we're also going to be playing Curse of Strahd soon, aren't we? So that's quite exciting.
Soon. Yeah, as I was saying to Ryan before, I've looked at the maps, I've made my notes, I'm gone, I don't think I can prepare anymore without over-preparing, which is, I guess you must have this all the time, right? It's like an amazing feeling, but also a terrifying feeling that you've not prepared enough. So.
Yeah, you just wait until the first session and we are already off the path that you think we were going to be on, and you're like, you know what, it was all for nothing.
It was all for nothing. But I guess it feels like cramming for a big test. It's like, what about this? And you go this, and it's like, oh cool, like, what, that means nothing.
Absolutely I'm just looking forward to like all of the backstory we've come up with, and then we're all dead within the first episode, and it's like, okay, great, there we go.
There is a contingency plan for that, so it's all good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for listening. Stick around, maybe on whatever Spotify or podcast service you're listening to this on, and it'll immediately roll into a new episode where you'll hear us all over again. Hey, why not repeat this episode and just listen to it back repeatedly on half speed or double if you're very exciting. Oh. And until then, see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.